Sorry, apparently it didn't go the first time. Thanks.
Well, here are our objectives for today in our roundtable discussion. Did everyone receive this handy learner persistence reflection tool by email? And Kristen, I'm not certain that you would have received that, but I trust that John can forward it to you if you would like to see that. The content of that reflection tool will be, however, embedded throughout the PowerPoint. So if you can see that, everybody, you're on the right page. We'll have all of this included in the PowerPoint. But you also received that by email so that you can reflect in advance on practices for your program and your classroom. So today we'll review what the research says about student persistence and check in on our progress, and also identify some next steps for action. We have had several trainings on this topic of journey to recruitment and journey to retention. And I'm really grateful for that opportunity to talk with all of you and to learn from each other today on these pillars of persistence. So given the research, we were able to digest from the NRS. So that was Becky and I and John for the first session that was an online national training. And the subsequent one, Amy Quiroga, was able to join in on student retention. So at any point, I would invite, and Kim was also present for that one. So at any point, if our colleagues want to jump in with things that we learned on the research, this is really another opportunity that we have as a PD team to ensure that high quality information is getting out to everyone in the state. And in my own digesting of it, it helped me to create this grid so that I could kind of condense what the research was saying to us and what NRS provided to us. So I hope it is as helpful for you as it was for me to kind of encapsulate that in a grid form. If you recall, at the top of your handout, it says that the ratings, 1 stands for very little at this time. Don't be shy if that's how you feel. And a 5 is outstanding, where I can't think of much room for improvement. So that's our scale for today. And we'll probably give you opportunities to put in the chat or hold up a finger for what number you would self-evaluate. So the first pillar we're looking at today is everybody okay with that? Any questions so far? For how many people does it ring a bell when I say journey to retention? Raise your hand if that rings a bell. Sounds familiar, journey to retention. Thank you. So the first pillar, we'll start here. Our journey today begins here with leverage the intake and orientation. And the first research-based strategy that we received was identify and resolve barriers to participation. This can apply to adult learners of any kind. How would you rate yourself and your program, and what current practices would you like to share that you think address this? And some of it could be plans in the works, something that you're planning but have not yet implemented. I think for our program, we do have some things in the works for identify and resolve barriers that we plan for next calendar year. As we go through our discussion today, you also feel free to make notes if you haven't already. Make notes on your handout as we get ideas from each other too.
Well,
Laura,
I
I
can
would say-
start.
Oh, go ahead.
Yep. One of the first barriers I think it's that we hear from a lot of students is just time. They don't have time, they're working, they have family, they don't have childcare, their car broke down. It's just a lot of very real life issues. And we are working on, because we're using Burlington English as our online program, so we are working on integrating that also in our in-person classrooms. So if the student encounters a barrier that prevents them from coming to class, they can work on Burlington at home. They can enter, they can do some exercises, they can do some practice with what we're doing in class. So they will still have that connection with English and they'll be able to practice and won't lose too much time until they hopefully, their situation improves and they'll be able to come back in person.
Thank you, Silka. Yeah.
I'd like to speak. I'm Desi Kranz and I work for the ESL program at the Career Learning Center in Rapid City. And some of the barriers we're seeing is, I think, common across all adult ed is childcare and transportation. And currently we're working with some of the other programming underneath our umbrella of Black Hills Special Services to start offering evening childcare to our GED students and ESL students. I think this will be huge, especially for the couples who have kids and young children, be able to both come to class instead of trying to negotiate whose turn it is and not either one of them coming or neither of them coming. And I think it will be a great opportunity for these children to also develop literacy skills as they approach kindergarten. So that's one thing we're working with and working with the local school districts to get some work experience for young adults as well. So trying to get this partnership kind of in the works and finalized will be really huge, I think, for our program and for the community, just all the partnerships it's going to include. So that's still in the works, but little by little, hopefully we can offer that for them.
At Cornerstones, one of the barriers that we identified fairly recently that I think has never really been considered a barrier in the past is how students make an appointment. We actually set up an online form on our website that students can click and fill out a form that's just request an appointment to make that initial contact to talk to us. So many people these days, and I am one of them, right? They don't want to pick up the phone and call necessarily. It's just like, can't I just put this in here and say, like, here's times that would work for me and somebody can contact me and let me know. We didn't even market that we had the ability to do this, and people were finding our website and finding this link, and it just kind of exploded. We've got a couple of staff people who have taken the responsibility for looking at those multiple times a day, I think, and then filtering them out to people, so they don't have the responsibility of contacting every one of those persons. It could spread out over the organization, but that's something that, like I say, it's not a traditional barrier, but I think more and more, especially for the generation of people that we're starting to see come into our programming more and more, that's something that they're going to look for. How much can I do online? I don't want to pick up the phone and talk to somebody necessarily.
Another innovation. Thanks to Becky and Desi for sharing. John, did you want to say a little bit more about barriers to employment? I saw your comment in the chat.
Sure, Laura. And, I think that's maybe the intersection of this case management, this intake and orientation really that precedes the case management. But, we don't always identify these barriers in the first 2 hours of contact, right? And we have to build rapport. And you know, of course, we have federal reporting obligations, but how do we collect that in a way that's sensitive to individuals and their situations, that's more empowering and not, you know, awkward or shameful disclosure, that we build that trust so we can help them navigate potential accommodations, reasonable accommodations in the workplace, or as I know many of you help navigate accommodations for GED testing and other such efforts. So, you know, we have references as a supplement to our standard intake form, but there's just so much that happens naturally or organically with the teachers, the intake staff, the support staff when they're dealing with um, new students or case managing existing students, and then helping identify that, whether it's food insecurity, help with voc rehab or the Department of Labor or housing or some other public service entity or nonprofit.
Thank you very much, John, for that context.
I'm wondering if a Cornerstone staff member wants to unmute themselves and talk a little bit about either point 2 or point 3. I know we've spent quite a bit of time over the last year working on those.
Yeah, I was just going to head to number 2. Beginning to develop a sense of community. Would be really curious to hear what your thoughts are on that. One of the things that our staff at LSS have done that I think feeds into developing that sense of community is encouraging both our online students and in-person students to name themselves, to show their name if it's an in-person class on a table tent. And for those that are online, we really encourage students or staff to change the name that's showing, so people know who they're working with, and teachers also sharing what their names are. Our instructors also put their own photo and their Google Voice number on learning packets, learning materials. So even knowing who's in the room, I think is something that helps us build community.
Well, a lot of times I get a lot of new students that come in and we have them talk to or introduce each other. And some of them have gotten together if they are from the same town and have helped them with resources and things. So it's kind of like they become like a family in the class by helping each other out and giving each other ideas if they are having problems in my class.
Thanks, Jennifer. Beautiful. Anything else on number 2 or 3, which is helping students set clear expectations for their participation?
A lot of
I think that's something that comes up in enrollment for us. Go ahead, Nikita.
I think a lot of us at Cornerstones have kind of been working on that. Since the journey to enrollment part, where we're giving students more either written or online instructions that they can access outside of class, and kind of doing our intake appointment, following certain steps, and giving students copies of the information that we're going through to try to clear up some of the confusion that maybe they'll have when they go home.
And
That is incredible.
One of the nice things that we talked about, because, you start talking about printed information, and when you deal with English language learners, we all start to think, oh, but we're going to have to translate this into how many different languages. I can't tell you how many times I have handed that packet of information across the desk and the student has immediately gotten their phone out, taken a picture, translated the page into their own language. It's just almost automatic for so many of our students now with some of the tools that are available to them. So we've kind of stopped worrying about that. We provide it in English. We use Google Translate ourselves, or the ILA in Aberdeen, to help explain what that information is. But so many of our students have become so resourceful that John referenced that AEL classroom test checklist and GED test checklist. We've also got, we call them our first appointment packets. And Nikita was the one who kind of pioneered that for GED. And then we created a version for ESL as well that just kind of steps through everything you need to know. And kind of the impetus behind that was we throw so much information at students when they make that first inquiry appointment about what our program is, what it entails, the expectations, all those things. It's too much to remember when they're already nervous and trying to navigate through something that's a little bit stressful and unfamiliar. So we've found that that has really helped to give them something that they can take with them and refer back to.
I'm also thinking of expectations in class, going over expectations when you have high level learners, even collaborating as a class, oral or written activity to create expectations. We will all try to be on time. We will all do our homework. We will all have one person talking at a time. And what also helps with some of those expectations, like doing your homework and getting to class on time, that students aren't always so good about, is discussing the buy-in. What is the benefit? Why should you do your homework? I'm never going to berate a student for not doing it, but the reason we do it is not to, just because we want to. There's a benefit to it, and explaining some of those benefits of the expectations.
It's funny, Kate, I've been doing classroom observations for the last couple of weeks. And that's something that I've seen in almost every class, whether it's just a conversation about it, or many of our teachers, even in the lower levels, have a slide that they share that just, and here's a reminder, here are our classroom rules or expectations. And it's those exact same things, all the things that you just mentioned. So I do think that's really important.
So I jumped ahead a little bit. So now we're on the right slide now, setting goals with students. And this in itself is a huge topic. So we can pick and choose from this list anything that you want to discuss regarding goals with students. And the next slide, we have more of the follow-up and check-ins. But as in terms of setting goals, these are the research-based strategies that NRS has provided for us. What here stands out to you that you'd like to give an update on?
I think for me, number two, the break long-term goals into smaller, realistic, achievable goals. We do that with our calendar. We stamp the back of the calendar every time they come to class, and they know that after X amount of number of classes, that depending upon their growth, they might be ready to take an assessment and see if they're ready for another level. Our students always want to know when will I be done? When will I learn English? When will I be finished? And so just letting them know you need this number of days of attendance for us to start thinking about growth and going on to a different level has really motivated at least the students in my classroom to have better attendance, to make sure that they got the stamp. They don't just rush out of the classroom. And they let me know when they're close to that number. They want to make sure they go receive an assessment. So it's even taken away the fear of testing, that they see it now as what the value of it is. So that's their buy-in. Yeah.
Diane, I really love how you integrated. I believe you're the one who suggested the mechanism for our instructors to integrate numeracy into that activity. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. At the top of our calendar every month, it asks the students how many stamps, we call them stamps, how many stamps did you have last month? And they count it up and they put that number in. And then the next month comes and they have to now add last month's stamps and this month's stamps to put up in that top calendar or that top space. So they're adding it and they're keeping track of it. It's their responsibility, not mine, to add and to let me know. So they're pretty adamant about bringing their packets with them. Just because the month is over, they don't throw the packets away anymore because they want the number of stamps. We do that the first day of every month to transfer that data. So they're keeping track of their own data for me.
And if they do forget their packets, they're pretty good of saying, teacher, I forgot my packet. Can you please stamp from yesterday? And I have to trust them because I don't always remember.
Do you find the students self-advocating when they have counted up that they have 60 hours of instruction are eligible for an ESL post?
Absolutely. They'll show me their number at the top of the calendar. Teacher, I'm ready. So I'm like, okay, we'll put your name on.
Love it. Anybody else have thoughts to share on goal setting with your students at any level? Nikita?
I think with GED, I mean, we've been working on this, but with GED, since everybody is kind of an ESL too, but since we're not like high school with a start date and a graduation date and everybody's following the same path, sometimes that's a little bit of a challenge because it's so open-ended, and I'm finding that like making it more restrictive is kind of helping my students, but trying to figure out how best to do that is kind of challenging. So if anybody has good ideas for that, I'd be interested in hearing those.
Are you thinking in terms of like what's a reasonable time frame for those smaller pieces? Is that kind of what you're?
Yeah, like, you know, when somebody comes in, it's like everybody's on their own time frame. Some students study for one test at a time, some students study for more than one. When I think a person should be taking a GED ready test and getting done with a subject isn't necessarily, you know, what their timeline is. And so then you're balancing, you know, everybody having a completely customized timeline and plan and trying to make that into something that's a little bit more manageable or easier from the teacher end to be able to follow up on.
I kind of like Diana's idea of making them accountable for tracking.
Yeah, and we're still working on how to communicate the possibilities of how much time it would take, what the variables are, and to let students self-identify. And one way that we've talked about doing that was through like a hero text or a student testimonial. And some of them true and some could be made up of if a person comes once a week to class and does no homework at home and then stops coming to class for 3 months because they went back to their native country. It's not unrealistic. But if we do that math in Diana's, going back to what Diana shared, how long will it take you to get 60 hours if you're on that pathway? So there are many, many paths to the same destination, and helping students do the math of how often do you think you can come realistically, and how long will it take you to achieve your first benchmark of graduating one level, for example, or making one level gain in a year. Even that is, it's not so tangible. So it's a really great question, Nikita, of how we
think
translate what's natural in our world as teachers to what makes sense for students.
I think that's a good idea though to you know, to use like Diane's idea, and maybe like especially for the first 12 hours, because that's a very short but important chunk of time in GED. And I think that it would be doable. Usually it's that's a little bit more similar for most students than maybe the big picture. And that could be something where we can make something virtual and trackable.
Great idea.
Yeah,
I love that too, Nikita. The 12-hour
yeah.
benchmark.
I like that too. And I think, you know, automatically I thought of trimesters, right? That first 12 hours followed by that subsequent And once we're into that third trimester, you know, that's what, 36 hours? That's real close to, you know, the publisher's recommended guidance for ABE learners on a TABE. And kudos that you talk about that route, right, with the stop outs and, you know, not only persistence, but the intensity. And I think that's the other piece there, duration and intensity.
Excellent. Anything else on goal creation you want to share?
Just briefly, and maybe this is more rhetorical, but I wonder how many of you either facilitate or find the students, the adult learners self-advocate for goals outside of my NRS thoughts, right? The measurable skill gain, a credential, entering employment, fourth quarter employment, etc., where it's things like, I want to get my driver's license. I want to get my citizenship naturalization, those sort of self-articulate. Is it natural for some of your learners? Is it really a challenge?
I think the biggest challenge we have is not articulating the end goal. The hardest part is the getting there. And that's where I think a lot of our students get bogged down. There's reasons for that. They might not have the language to be able to say, okay, if the goal, the broad, lofty goal, I want to learn English. Okay, what does that mean? How can we measure the steps along the way? They might not have the English to articulate that. They might come from a background where they don't have that academic background of goal setting and making the small things of setting the goals. And for a lot of our students, especially low-level newly arrived refugees, they're kind of just deer in the headlights. They're still getting used to it, which can be, they're still adjusting. So the idea of maybe a goal or benchmarks to the goal is maybe just a little abstract at the moment.
I honestly think that can be true for our GED students as well. I mean, it's one of those things where, you know, it's the big joke is always their goal is to get their GED, and they want to do it as fast as they can typically. So helping them break that down into those smaller pieces is sometimes a challenge. It's difficult to get them to acknowledge that it can't really happen in a very short amount of time for most people. One of the things that I've found, especially just like if you're having a conversation with a student, and I know a lot of our teachers have also been doing conferences in the last 2-3 weeks here with their students, because we feel like it's important to have that one-on-one time after they've been in class for a while too, you know, to have those conversations. I had one young lady in my office this week who she told me one of her goals was to be a better person. And, you know, I'm going to endorse that every time. I hope it's all of our goal to become a better person. But what I asked her was, what does that look like to you? Right? What specific behaviors are you going to have to work on in order for, in your mind, to achieve that goal of becoming a better person? And it became a really interesting conversation. So I think sometimes even just kind of asking a question like that, you know, you want to get your GED. Okay, in your mind, how does this work? What are you going to need to do? What are we going to need to do? What are we going to have to do together in order to make that happen? Because, you know, that was a very, very abstract kind of goal. So I wasn't sure what else to do with it, right? I didn't have steps for her to make that happen because I didn't know enough about what she was thinking about. But I really, you know, it led to kind of a line of questioning that I think would work well for more concrete things as well. Just, you know, so in your mind, what does that mean to you? Because it might not be the same frame of reference that we're coming at it from.
If I could just, I send out a autobiography. And I know all the Cornerstones people know this at the beginning of class to my students. And the last question on the autobiography is actually, here are a few of my personal goals for the year. And I just want to take just a second, if you don't mind, just read a couple of them. For my students, one is have a more fluent English. Another one was improve English, a new car, and increase my savings. One was I'm interested in learning English to improve my quality of life. One was I want to join the military. And then the most important thing is to learn English, and I hope to learn a lot from my teacher and that she helps me a lot. So that's just like 4 different students out of 30 that I have, but they have a lot of different goals.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I'm attempting to advance the slide. Did I do it? There it is. Okay. Sometimes my computer feels sluggish. I think it needs its afternoon coffee. Set goals with students. Okay, this is the number 6 and number 7, monitoring progress and using your career navigator to help students with their goals. I think what Becky shared about the conferences, that is a beautiful practice to check in, like a stay interview. What keeps you coming? What are your barriers? What are your goals? How is it going with your class, with our class?
What can we do better? That's one of the questions that everybody's asking. What do you want more of? What do you want different? Yeah.
Awesome, Becky. So you're doing those check-ins. Beautiful. Anything else to add to these two? No, that's okay. We have plenty of research-based strategies, and this next pillar is our fostering buy-in, which Kate mentioned in one of her shares. I think a lot of the practices you've talked about already really help to nurture that student buy-in, and Becky's explication of talking someone through why do you want this and what does that look like for you, having them help build their own plan in that guided discussion. That's a beautiful way to foster student buy-in. So here are some of those research-based strategies, and I would invite anybody to share your thoughts on fostering of student buy-in here.
I happened upon one accidentally. I would think it wasn't something I had planned. But this month we've been talking about job interviews and that sort of thing. And skills is always a hard word for them to understand that concept of. So I flipped it a little bit and I started talking about, well, what job did you do in your country? And then we talked about, well, what do I need to know to do that job? And now they're starting to get the idea of what that word skill means. Um, but then it also then turned around to, I have a lot of students who didn't have jobs in their country. So we talked about, well, then what did you do in your country? And they're like, well, I was a student. And then, well, what were you learning? And then it just helped me to understand that I've got one student who was studying math and another student was studying economics, and one was becoming a business manager and one was studying education to teach children. And just, wow, what a wide variety of skills that they're set out and that they know from their past, and they're coming in, right? And I want them to be able to say that at that job interview. I don't want them to say, oh, I know how to clean a house and I know how to cut meat, right? Those are the jobs that are available here. But I want them to say, I have customer service skills, or I have organizational skills. Yeah, so just broadening up the idea for them of what skills means and how much they actually have that they can bring to the interview.
I think the other thing, and I'm kind of looking at number 3, we often talk to our students about the fact that what they do in coming to our classes shows their workplace skills, right? It shows those soft skills. You come to class every day, you're on time, you're prepared, you bring your materials, you've done your homework, you interact with your classmates, you help your classmates. you ask questions, you solve problems, and those are all workplace skills. So, helping them see the connection between the skills they're showing in class, regardless of English or math or social studies, I think, and then making sure that they understand that those are valued skills for employers. Those are the kinds of skills that often earn you promotions to jobs where you can earn more money if you're a reliable employee, who is able to do those things.
Thanks, Becky. I think number one is really important and is a part of the foundation of adult education. Uh, for many years is our ability to be responsive to the learner's interests. And I know a lot of us use curriculum that is pre-designed and pre-planned. Yet I feel like we also have an ability to spend less time on something they're not very interested in, or skip it altogether. If I have I'm doing a lesson on parenting and nobody in my class has young children, we may skip over that, or I'll customize it so that it is relevant to them. So that is really important. We know that our students vote with their feet if they're not receiving something that's really immediately relevant to them. And it helps us to know what our students are most interested in. And I really appreciate too I had a recommendation from a ethnic community leader about the value of number 2, of bringing in or introducing or connecting our students to others from their culture that have made progress, so that they can feel like this is where I identify. We are not able to have teachers that represent every culture that we serve. In a perfect world, great, but we've worked with 71 different cultures, so we don't have 71 staff to meet that need. But even upperclassmen or upper classmates being an example to the ones at the lower levels, alumni would be really amazing to do. Um, that's one of the examples of what number 2 can look like. I can't say we've made great progress in that, but it's something that I'd love to do as ideas for enhancement. Sorry about that. Again, my computer is a little bit slow. Okay, the next pillar is to focus on our instructional practices. So here you see the research-based strategies. What stands out to all of you? What updates can you share?
I don't know, to me, as I look at this, it really is the culmination almost of the other 3 pillars, right? It's where theory and practice intersect for praxis, right? We've talked about, customized education. I think Nikita had mentioned that explicitly. We talked about different learning styles, about student leadership, with senior classmates, advanced classmates, everything from name tents to building a cohort of community or of scholars in that classroom, whether it's a cohort of 2 or 12, and empowering them to articulate goals, short-term goals, helping them chunk and make manageable their personal work ready and educational goals. And this is really, I think, the personification of high quality instruction at the local levels. So
Thank you, John. It does encapsulate a lot of best practices when we think about this pillar. And number 2 is one that that our program continually discusses is how do we assist life students and people with degrees and certifications in the same class? How do we assist those that are advancing very quickly and are very tech savvy, and at the same time assist those that have limited first language literacy? So that would be part of our number 2 as a local program. And then Silka at the beginning of the session today talked about use of Burlington English and training the students to use this for a distance or a blended learning opportunity when they don't have class or they can't come to class. They can pivot to online instruction or they can do independent studies using Burlington English, and we can track those hours. And some of our teachers have worked really effectively to train the students on how to use Burlington English, even in the classroom environment, so they have the skills to do so independently when they need to. So that would be our number 6, one of our strategies for number 6 and 5. And then Diana's share self-efficacy is in the tracking of their hours. That's part of their self-efficacy.
Kate, I'd like for you to share about how you encourage leadership at the beginning of each class when you ask the students to come up and be the teacher.
Absolutely. One of my routines in my 10 and 6 o'clock classes, which are my oral 1 classes, is we always start the day talking about the date. I put the calendar under the dot cam and I ask a student to come up and be the teacher, asking the other students, what is today? Everybody says today is Monday, blah, 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 blah. And then we repeat that with what was yesterday and what is tomorrow. But yeah, I always ask for a student, and sometimes they're like, "Oh, you do it, haha." And we make a joke about that. Some students are shy and they never want to do it, even though they know they can. But it's nice to see. And today I had a man doing it, and he was just adorable. He was like mimicking the teacher and like really good English. Good morning, students. Very good, excellent. And it made me laugh, but also it was a very job well done. And then we all clap for the students and cheer because they do a good job. I like to do that also in other activities that I've modeled. In oral 1, for example, if we're doing an activity, we do a lot of differentiation between the numbers teen and the numbers that have the D sound, 13, 30, because it gets very, very tricky. I model it. I give them a paper with the numbers written on it. They listen to me say it and they have to touch the number they hear. After I've done that, I ask another student to be the teacher. They say the number, which works on their pronunciation. And then of course we all clap for them.
Love that positive reinforcement too, Kate.
I actually do the almost the same activity as what Kate said in my Lit 1 evening classes. For alphabet pronunciation activities, I usually have like a few students raise their hands, and they are they enjoy it. They just enjoy it, and also a lot of my students in the classes, they felt so comfortable after that activity, and they just didn't really feel a lot of stress. So I see a lot of progress with that activity.
one of Nalco's oral or Lit 1 Eve students, I have seen him after Lit 1, oral 1 is finished and the 7 o'clock class starts, he'll literally start going in and teaching it, waiting for Nalco to the other students.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. Yes.
That's great, great student leadership, Nalco.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Offering flexibility is the next of the pillars. And here are those research-based strategies on flexibility. What updates would you like to share about this? And perhaps our programs are really built. I think our programs are built for this out the gate on having choices of time, flexible schedules. We don't do business without having flexible class schedules, I think, in adult basic education.
You know, I think at Cornerstones, one of our rules is new students start on the first Monday of the month, typically. So that there's not a new student coming into class every day. You know, we want teachers to be able to expect that's when new students will come in, and it helps them to orient those new students when they come into the classroom. But if a student is transferring, they don't have to wait. So if somebody is in an afternoon class and their work schedule changes and they come to their teacher and say, I can't come to class anymore, I need to come to class in the evening, then they don't have to wait until the beginning of the next month. That's an existing student transfer and they get to go right away, or at the beginning of the next week. Sometimes, you know, it's a lot of times a little bit of a negotiation there, but they don't have to sit out and wait until that time. And I think that's one of the ways we can be flexible with our students. We have to have some structure, but we also have to recognize when that structure doesn't fit anybody's needs, ours or the students. So.
We've offered some IET, advanced IET courses where students, and that's integrated education and training, where students enrolled in English classes, for example, and also enrolled in a workforce training course. And with those, we've had, oftentimes the norm is what I need to offer a hybridized version of the class, especially if it gets to be very intensive and the duration is great. In order to retain our students, we've had to offer a Zoom group or a Zoom link to people that are now outside the country or outside the state and still want to be able to attend classes while they're traveling. That's been a really important flexibility for us. The next topic is leveraging data. We have 3 research-based strategies in this pillar. Who has leveraged data to support student persistence?
Hopefully we all have.
Amy helps us with number 1. So I work with Amy Quiroga to generate a list of former students or students that have been AWOL for a little bit and may need a nudge, a check-in from somebody. So we continue to work on refining what does that look like to do student outreach for those that have been already enrolled in the program.
At Cornerstones, we did do some student surveying. We got limited responses, I think, as you always do from student surveys, but we did get some interesting information back that helped us to kind of focus in on some of the areas we might need to work on. And then again, those student conferences are one of the ways that we assess on an ongoing basis where we're at, where students are at, how we're doing. And John mentioned in the chat that GED testing has its 304 campaign. We actually had typically I run the report from GED manager that just tells me who GED tested in a month. I do that at the end of every month when I'm doing all the rest of my data entry, so I make sure I didn't miss any student GED ready tests or final tests somewhere in the mix. And it was just a couple months ago. Was that at staffing? Nikita asked me if I can just put drop a copy of that into the folder where we have all the rest of our reports. And there's absolutely no reason I can't, right? I've already run the report. The work is done.
Oh, Becky, you're on mute. Sorry. Just flipped right on.
Just cut me off. It decided I'd talked long enough. Yeah, Nikita had asked if they could have that report in the folder where I keep all the rest of the reports every month. And yeah, there's absolutely no reason I can't just drop it in that folder for everybody. I've already done the work of running it. So, you know, just having that in front of them sometimes is helpful too, seeing which students have done which tests and if anybody's ready to go for a final.
We've been exploring too as a team, talking about ways to note the assessment score at entry and let students track what is their post-test score so they can see that number 3 strategy have an easier way to get feedback on their progress from an assessment perspective. But yeah, if there are reports that are handy that a teacher can access, that's really helpful. Yeah, go ahead,
If I
Amy.
could just put, I probably should have said this back when we were talking about enrollment. It didn't seem to fit, but it doesn't fit anywhere else either. So I'll just say it now. Just as an enroller, I've discovered that the students, if they haven't been in adult education before, of course, the only framework for education they have in their mind is, if they have education in their background, is kids, you know, kind of K-12 education from their countries, which is, of course, there's a beginning point and there's an end point, and then you take a test and then you go to the next class, and maybe you have a break in between those years, you know. And so when they come to our school, you know, again and again and again, I get the question, how long will it take for this level, or how long before I finish this, or how long can I come, or, you know, it's just it's a foreign concept that our classes just continue. You know, you might be in this class for 1 month, or maybe for 5 months, or whatever, you know, it depends on the person. And I think that, of course, as we've discussed, it makes it a little bit harder for the students to know how well they're progressing, or just to have expectations of how will I measure how I'm doing, because there aren't exactly semesters or quarters or, you know, at the end of the semester, everybody goes to the next class. And so I think we've been talking about having a student handbook to potentially address some of this informational gaps at enrollment. But also, I think it leads to, number one, here on the screen, re-engaging them through communication. You know, students just kind of fall off, and they don't mean to. A lot of times they don't mean to, they're just busy, and then they're still busy, and they're still busy, and they kind of lost track that it's been 5 months since they've been in class. And so when we call them, they're always so grateful, because they still do see the value of it. It just hasn't been on the forefront of their mind. So I'm just thinking about landmarks for them. if that can keep them from just sort of falling away, the direct communication is very important. Even if they're not able to come back, they really appreciate that connection. And years later, 12 years later, 12 years later, they can come back to school and remember me. And, it's been in the back of their mind for 12 years. And eventually the stars align and they can come back to class. Yeah. So I'm just thinking about our student handbook, which would be the ideas for enhancement of just kind of giving them information like that ahead of time so they don't have to wonder what's going on here. Here I am, I'm still here, and some people are leaving, and how long am I, not that we don't talk about that ever in class, of course, but just to make things sort of more clear in their mind, maybe. And which is why what Diana talked about, becomes very valuable too, because it's a landmark. That was rambly. Thank you.
One thing I take from that, Amy, is the importance of normalizing intermittent learning. That our students feel like it is normal. You're not the only one who comes and goes, but what they get at enrollment is not necessarily enough, that they're going to remember that conversation they had with Amy Quiroga at enrollment in that 1 hour session. Now 12 years later, she did say I could come back to classes if I needed to. So what are other ways we can give them that, recycle that guidance for them? I know we're at time, but we're also at the end of the pillars. The last pillar was to integrate transition skills for career pathways, so that students have the tools they need for education beyond our programs. And then what we're doing today, the professional development and technical assistance to help all of our partners in the state to be successful in this. So that's what John, Becky, Kim, and I are here for, and others as they provide T3s like this, and Amy as a resource to us as well as our data specialist at Center for New Americans, and got to represent on one of these trainings. So thanks everybody for your participation today. I hope everybody can come away. Sorry if you hear all of the planes in the background. They just decided to have an air show right now. If you can hear that, there's an air show going on evidently. But I hope that everyone has some food for thought in your mind that would be action on next steps. I know that as a local program, we're continually engaging on that, but also as a state PD team, we're a resource for you as you continue to have questions that pop up and as you develop your programs. So that with that, we want to thank you for attending today. John, anything you want to share in closing?
Have a safe, enjoyable holiday week next week. And thank you to all of you for making this such a meaningful conversation. It was a pleasure. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for facilitating our